Welcome back to Realty Consultants as we talk about real estate investing. We're here today and we've got a number of topics we're going to discuss. Brian, how are you doing?
Good.
Fantastic. As a new investor, what should someone be looking for? Where should someone be looking to get started?
Probably, first thing is where I'm going to invest.
Yeah.
There's so many. We get calls from people all over the country, wanting to know about our area here. But if you're looking to get into investing, that's probably the first thing you want to do. You're going to stay most likely around where you're at in your area, but there's opportunities all over.
Yeah, it's always easy to invest where you currently reside. You know the market, you know the area, and it makes it easier to make decisions on specific locations and markets. But at the same token, as you mentioned, we get a lot of phone calls and conversations from folks from all over the country that are looking to put their money to use in areas where that's more advantageous in the real estate world. And so talk to us about, if let's say I'm in an area that maybe not be, advantageous, or even let's take another step. I can't afford to invest where I currently am living. What would someone look for in trying to, nail down a general location?
So the biggest thing you'd look for is growth. You want to look for population growth. You want to look for job growth. You want to look for growth that's going on within the area that you're looking at there. Obviously, when you invest in a rental property, let's say, your goal is for it to go up in value and/or bring you a cash flow from that. So you really want to see rents increasing over time. You don't want to see kind of a stagnant rent pool because there's no growth in the area.
Okay. So when we're looking at growth, we're looking at the rent price, but are you also looking at the cost of the actual real estate purchase and the growth there? Are you looking for negative growth? Obviously, negative growth is not a good thing, but what are you looking for so far as maybe the cost of the property?
Yeah, so before we had this kind of inflection in the residential real estate market, you could go in areas and find some distressed, depressed properties that are still going to bring you a decent rent value on a property. Some of your larger cities would have that. You would have areas that were a little bit more distressed, but there was still a floor on the rent values in those areas. So you could go in there and it would cost you, X amount to get in there, X amount of expenses on a monthly basis, but your rent exceeded that. And a lot of times exceeded it pretty well. So you could build a decent cash flow. With the market that's kind of adjusted the way it has, values are going up quicker. Purchase values are going up quicker than rent values. Rents will follow along with that. Usually rents are a lagging growth piece. But you're not finding currently the lower values like you could before, but they'll be back.
Sure. So as we're looking through properties, and let's say, the quintessential out-of-town real estate investor, let's say I live in New York City, or I live in San Francisco, or I live somewhere where the actual cost of real estate is just so high that buying multiple rental properties in that area just sometimes don't make sense because of what I have to pay for it versus what I can rent it for don't jive. So I'm in those higher priced areas, and those are the phone calls we're getting every day. because North Carolina, specifically, between the mountains and the coast, in between that area, is a high growth area. There's a lot of industry. There's a lot of population growth, and price of real estate is not, at this point, it has been rising like a lot of places, but it's not overinflated as compared to the rental prices, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as folks are looking to take their money and put it into use, looking at states, cities that have good growth, but yet cost of living is more, and not astronomical, is super important.
Yeah, that's important. And another thing too, and we'll talk about later, is when we talk about an expense formula. But one of the big things too when you're looking at areas is taxes.
Yeah.
Some areas have much larger real estate taxes on your properties. Some places have no real estate taxes. So I mean, that becomes a part of the equation as well.
So we know where we want to put our money. We've nailed down a geographic location. Hopefully it's if it's where we currently reside, great. If it's in another location because of growth, that's fantastic. But let's take it the next step further. So I know where I want to do it. What am I buying? What options do I have available to me if I want to stay in that residential game?
Yeah. So the options are numerous, different things. Start out, largest area would probably be single family residential. You have condos, you have townhomes, you have multifamily, small multifamily, duplexes, triplexes, large multifamily, apartment buildings, things of that nature.
Cool. So when we're looking at trying to determine what type of property we're looking at, I've seen different things, and we'll delve into this in just a second. Are condos or townhouses a good place to invest? But beyond going to the specific of those right now, walk me through the decision-making process when you're when you're going to start investing. You have to have a game plan, and you really need to look and see what your goal is, determine what you want to purchase, and all that's going to be determined upon what type of money you have available to you. So walk me through kind of what you look at when determining what to purchase.
Well, we talked about this before, but I think at the end of the day, you really have to ask yourself, what's my goal? Is my goal to have a cash flow property, or is my goal to have this property that I purchase appreciate? It's kind of hard to get both. I mean, you're going to get a blend of that at some point, but you really need to figure out what your goal is there. The reason I say that is because if you're just looking for cash flow, properties like townhomes and condos may work just fine for you. They're usually going to be less expensive to get into, but then from an appreciation standpoint, you've got the struggle of, okay, here's 25 units that are the exact same thing. So when you're having market kind of fluctuation, you're really based on what each one of them is selling for, and unless there's a lot of things happening to these properties, there's not really a whole lot of growth in value, because if you're just getting a bunch of turnover from that standpoint, it's going to stay fairly stagnant in the appreciation. However, you can get them for a little bit less. They make great rentals. And then you're basically building your cash flow.
Well, since you've kind of gone down that road, let's dig into that deeper. Let's just ask that question: are condos and townhouses good investment property? And you basically nailed it down. It depends. It depends. And that's going to be a common thread and theme when you ask any question about investing in real estate. It just depends on what your goals are. But as you're rolling through condos and townhomes, it's a great investment for someone who necessarily doesn't have a lot of cash to be able to set aside, don't have a ton of cash to get into it, and they're looking for a little bit of growth and a little bit of cash flow in those realms. The reason I say that, not needing a lot of cash, because you don't have to come out of pocket for those large expenditures, i.e. if you're in a townhouse and condo community, typically your big expenses, your roofs, painting of exterior or siding or things of that nature are a lot of times included in your HOA dues, which are part of that deal. So you're not having to come out of pocket for those. But on the flip side, while you've been paying for it every month in your condo association dues, your cash flow is really limited because of, your rents can only go a certain amount, and there's always going to be that association fee that you're going to be paying that limits your cash flow that you're getting in.
Yeah, you don't have a whole lot of control over that piece. And I would say anybody that's going to invest in a townhome community or a condo in a condo community, you get to know the HOA, you get to know the financials, because those are going to intertwine within your investment itself. So basically, if you purchase a condo in a condo community that's not well taken care of from a financial standpoint, it could hurt your investment. And you really have no control over that. Now, the flip side of that, on the expense piece, it's great that all these things are covered, but if you're trying to control expenses on your cash flow standpoint, HOA is one that you can't really control. Now, at least in our area, they're not allowed to go up more than, I think it's 10% in a 1-year period. But, and do you see that? Not often. But they can still, you can see HOA increase every year based on all the expenses that they're having to do.
Sure. And if you're going to invest in a townhome or a condo community, it can just be as simple, as when you said looking at the health of the financials is really important. But I would take it a step further. When you go look at it, if you walk onto the property and it's well maintained and taken care of, it's a pretty good indication that there's enough money to be able to keep up with the exterior and keep things looking nice, which is typically a good future indicator that when you do get the income statement balance sheets, that you're going to see a real healthy situation of what we need to spend on, what the plans to spend on, and that we've got this good reserve to be able to take care of those and not have to come back to the owners again for additional funds.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we're looking at, condos and townhouses can be good intro steps into the rental game. They also can be tie your hands of how much you can get out of them on a monthly basis. Walk us through, you have your portfolio is primarily single family, but you do have some small multifamily. Walk us through the differences between those two and why maybe a mix is a good strategy, or just one or the other being a good strategy. Why would you choose the single family over a small multifamily?
So as I've grown in my portfolio, the single families was always what I kind of started with and what I built up. First of all, we don't have a whole lot of small multifamily in our marketplace. I've bought some. They've made great investments for me. It's a little difficult sometimes from an appraisal standpoint to get the purchase to go all the way through. But once you do, it's fantastic. The difference between single family and small multifamily is you're able to mitigate the risk of the actual property. For example, if you're looking at just how a property is working for you, if you have a single family residence that is paying you $1,000 rent and that tenant is not in there for 1 month, you are getting 0 rent for 1 month. If you have let's call it a small duplex that rents for $1,200 a month total, $600 on each side, well, if you've got one vacancy, you're still getting $600 for that property. So it just kind of mitigates your vacancy risk more than anything.
Sure. And I would probably, at the same token, mitigating the vacancy risk, you're also spreading out some of the capital expenditures on the property.
Correct.
Versus, having to put a roof on one unit versus, one roof can cover 2 units on a duplex or a triplex or whatever.
Right.
But yes, in our particular market, the downside to the small multifamily, there's a lot of upside in the type of investment. The downside for us really is there's just not a lot of them there.
Right.
The space to come in and build the small duplexes sometimes comes cost prohibitive, and zoning regulations are involved with that. So as the types of properties that folks are going to be looking at, small multifamily, condos, and townhouses, and then single family. If you had to say, this is the small investor, we're gonna take our large investor and we're gonna put them in this other bucket over here, which if they were looking at 30, 60, 150, 250 unit apartment complexes, that's a completely different ballgame. We're really looking at primarily the smaller investors, smaller to mid-sized investors. If you had to choose, okay, Brian, which one are you going after? And you had the opportunity to look at all across the board, the same financial gain on a monthly basis, townhouse, condo, single family, small multifamily. Which one would you choose?
I'm preferential to single family residential. It may be a little more costly than some of your condos or your townhomes that you're doing, but I like it because I'm still going to get some appreciation there versus the townhome and the condos where, again, you have 25 that are exactly the same that may turn over 3 or 4 times a year. I've got a single family that's totally different for the most part. I mean, there are some communities where you see the same floor plan a lot of times, but even then there's differences with each one. So that's why I focus there. I love the idea of smaller multifamily as well. We just don't have that much of it around here, but they've all done really, really well for me. I will say this about the small multifamily that you have to keep your head wrapped around too, is the utilities. So a lot of times these small multifamilies are converted. They've been converted from a single family unit to a duplex, let's call it, but they didn't break out the utilities. So if you don't have that done, and that's not a cheap process to go through, then typically your landlord's going to be the one responsible for paying all the utilities, and then it's just going to be, tied up into the rent versus, a tenant paying rent and then also paying the utilities as well, putting the utilities in their name.
And that's typically never a wash. That's when that happens, the landlord is typically eating costs at some point.
Yeah, a lot of times, because a tenant's not going to pay a lot more than market value rent,
right?
Even if the utilities are included.
Awesome. So that's a good wrap around the types of properties that you can delve into and have available. And I think this is going to be true for most of your suburban markets that are similar to us, maybe not in your urban areas, but really your suburban areas. That's going to be kind of a similar situation as you're looking at different areas.